Hi, and welcome to The Horn, a podcast from the International Crisis Group. I'm Alan Boswell. Today, we're talking to Mohammed Mubarak on Somalia. Mohammed is a political and security analyst, and he's on the show today to talk about the ongoing political crisis in Somalia, which has already broken out in fighting in Mogadishu. We will also have a look ahead at the long-term implications of the current impasse. Mohammed, thanks for taking the time to come on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So I think, so much is happening so fast, watching this political crisis in Somalia, yet in many ways it feels a bit like a Groundhog Day. We brought you on to help us make sense of it all and to also take a step back and discuss what all this might mean for the broader federal project in Somalia. First, though, can you talk us through the state of play at the moment? Of course, President Farmajo moved to extend his mandate by 2 years. There was violence that broke out in Mogadishu as the military showed signs of starting to fracture, and then it looks like now Farmajo has backtracked some. So where do things stand now in terms of this long election crisis?
I think it's a positive development, to be honest, that the president at the end, he stepped back from the brink and he said that he's going to allow the prime minister to take the lead. I think because of his actions in the past couple of months, and the breakdown of trust among the stakeholders, I think it's going to take a lot more because we've already seen some responses from the opposition that they are not happy about how this is going, that the president has to concede more power. He has to hand over total control of the security forces, not only the security forces that will be in charge of the elections. So I think one step forward, one step backwards. We're just where we were.
And what do you make of this commitment to hand over election security to his prime minister?
Personally, I think that's very positive. And the president clearly wants to move on from this. He calculated that he could win an indirect elections, and he overplayed his hand by trying to rig the system before the elections. And now he is very desperate to get things moving. I think the opposition feels like they can wring more things away from him. I think it's positive, but the opposition is not saying it's positive.
And militarily, what really took place during this fighting? My understanding is President Farmajo and Villa Somalia lost a fairly significant part of Mogadishu, lost that control to essentially opposition forces.
So I think we need to look at this and with a bigger view and look at the context. And Mogadishu was always not really in the control of the government beyond the Wadnaha Street. That's about half of the city was always not really in control of the government. The government had checkpoint on Wadnaha Street, and when you're trying to get into the rest of the city, so that's where the government considered its base of control. So what happened is he lost about half of the territory and beyond Wadnaha Street. So he already had lost the rest of the north of Wadnaha Street. It was mostly contested areas. I think half the districts of Mogadishu are contested, with Al-Shabaab controlling some parts of the periphery as well, and clan militias controlling the rest. So the opposition moved into the government heartland and took some districts. That really, the president felt the pressure. They are now at less than a kilometer from his residence. So it was a complete rout.
Farmajo isn't exactly known for compromising. And rather than just walking back this extension, he gave even additional concessions, such as the handing over, at least ostensibly, of some power to his prime minister. So I'm just wondering your read of what exactly happened. You say he's desperate now. Was this essentially, the opposition flexing their muscles and creating new facts on the ground? Was this the threat of sanctions? What really changed in terms of forcing Farmajo's hand?
I think, as we may have seen, and as we've seen clearly from the past couple of months, Farmajo is not animated by international threats of sanctions. He doesn't care, to be honest. He has a very small view of the world that surrounds him. What he sees is that's it. He doesn't care about abstract threats. He sees he has a strong army. He has supporters around him. That's all he sees. So, and he was impressed by brute force, and he saw the reality on the ground. He not only lost ground, he lost security forces defected, and basically all the clan militias defected. That's the whole Somali National Army. It left his side, and so he was left with the more professional security forces trained by Turkey and the Americans. They, of course, done up and was not going to fight anyway. And Gorgor Turkish-trained Gorgor was part of the February 19th crackdown. But this time round, they refused. They said, we're not going to fight for you. We're not going to fight another part of the Somali National Army. It was fine fighting and clan militias on the 19th of February. But now, this is impossible. We can't do that. So he saw no out, and he could only use Eritrea-trained Nisa forces and Haramat, which is part of the police force. And that was not enough. So he lost really badly.
And also, there was always sort of talks. We've talked about it before in previous podcasts we've done on Somalia, that this was always the sort of threat that was looming over, was that if he didn't compromise, that he might lose control of some of the military forces. Did he not see this coming, or what do you think? I'm just curious if he, just read things wrong, or if he was just pushing things beyond what he should have.
I think Farmajo, if things played out how he was expecting, I think everything would be amazing for him. And he paid the salaries of the security forces on time and for the past 4 years, and nobody has ever done that in recent Somali history. So Farmajo was counting on that. He thought he built some loyalty from the security forces, especially the army, and he built an extra forces that he thought would be loyal to him. All of that, he didn't expect this.
Interesting. And also, is the government running out of money? I know the government has come out and said that essentially most of the donors have pulled out. Can the government keep itself financed if they hadn't started to backtrack?
When you look at the core government functions, the government could finance itself from tax collection in Somalia and some of the monies it gets from its benefactors. But because they use a lot of money for bribery and buying loyalties and sorting out issues with the clans, they're running out of money. And the finance minister said so himself recently, that he said we are at the barrel, like we are at the end of the barrel. And when the fighting started last week, they said, no, we're not running out of money. So in order to stop the bleeding of support, they think that because of they're running out of money, that's why they're losing some support, and it's not that.
Interesting. Okay. And just quickly, before we move on to some bigger questions I was hoping to pose to you, what's next after these recent moves back and forth? Do you think this is just another means for Farmajo to try to control the process, or was this a real turning point?
I think Farmajo, and looking at the big picture, this was a turning point, to be honest. But Farmajo doesn't see that, and he thinks he can wiggle his way out of this. And that's why he made some concessions. And I think this is a new chapter. It's a very dangerous chapter. Not only is this threatening Farmajo's power, even after Farmajo leaves, this is going to be a problem for whoever comes next. Or even if Farmajo comes back, this is not going to go away.
Yeah, thanks. And that's a great segue to some of these bigger questions I hope to pose to you. Obviously, anytime security services start to fracture on clan or sectional lines, that's obviously a really big deal. So looking ahead, can Somalia stitch back security forces after this? This continues much longer. And there's still a lot of talk about a post-AMISOM future, and I'm wondering, the sort of implications of this looking ahead, in your view.
I think things that happened are showing us that we really lack a coherent security force and a coherent security structure. This has really brought to the fore the problem with the so-called Somali National Army. And the reason being that while we have an army by name, most of the handguns firearms they use are owned by clans. And that's why you will find that some units will not operate in some areas because they would say our clan elders do not approve. I don't want to name clan names, but in Lower Shabelle, you will find clans that have interest in Lower Shabelle will send their battalions to fight in Lower Shabelle. In Middle Shabelle, you'll find battalions of clans that have interest in Middle Shabelle. And in Mogadishu, everybody has an interest in Mogadishu, so you have all battalions there from every clan. So we don't have really a national army. And the only reason this didn't come to the fore is because we did not have a political crisis like now. So we have that problem. What we've been doing is having that problem there and ignoring it, and also wishing that it would go away, and also in the meantime trying to build a professional army without integrating the clan militias into making them a professional army. And down the road, we'll see what we're seeing now. They will fight each other whenever there's a political crisis. And as for AMISOM leaving, I think it's wishful thinking, to be honest, at this point. If AMISOM leaves, even without AMISOM leaving, right now we're seeing Al-Shabaab expanding, taking more territory. Just a couple of years ago, AMISOM, even now, it keeps launching operations to regain areas that were regained 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I, of course, want to speak with you about Al-Shabaab later on. What do you think are the long-term implications of this debacle, this political election crisis, on consolidating the federal model? Do you think this has sort of just shown the weaknesses of it, or has this really set things back?
I think the political impasse has shown that we have some issues really we need to iron out, delineating the power of the federal government and the federal member states and who controls elections, where, when. This is not sustainable. We cannot have every 4 years and 5 men come together and decide, when are we going to hold elections and where. This is dangerous, and a situation whereby every 4 years there's a political crisis.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering, essentially what's happened to a degree is the opposition flexing its muscles in many ways was, the Hawiye clan, from my understanding, which does dominate Mogadishu and much of the area around it, essentially mobilizing, to show that they were opposed to the Formaggio extension. Does the sort of that amount of leverage with the people who reside around Mogadishu and the clans and subclans there, does that make a bit of a mockery of the entire federal model, or is that putting it too bluntly?
I think it's way more complicated than that. And Mogadishu is a multi-clan and city. It's because it's the capital, and there's no one clan that we can really say for sure it's the majority. The only difference being that between with the Hawiye, because it's they live near the city, so their militiamen can just come and operate in the capital, and easier than other clans that are based 400, 500 kilometers away. However, yes, to an extent, this shows that the federal system hasn't worked, because the clan militias are fighting in the city and have gone back to where they were in 1991 lines. What I'm saying is, in 1991, there was, during the Civil War, each clan had a front line. So you find that sub-clan X will go to its front line from 1991. Sub-clan Y will go to its front line from 1991. Nothing really has changed, to be honest. We have been blindsided. We focused too much on counterterrorism and Al-Shabaab that we forgot to fix the basic security issues. Clans have not really reconciled, and there is still a mentality of, this is my front line, this is my area, this district belongs to me. We still have that problem, and we need to address this issue before we can address the underlying problems with federalism and security and political inclusion.
So in some ways, you have a state that can't really fully finance itself if the donors pull out, and in some ways can't protect itself if the outside forces pull out. And this, whether or not this is a turning point for Somalia, it seems like a bit of an inflection point. I'm wondering if there's any conclusions here about where the federal project, the state building project, is heading, if it is progressing, or if you feel to a certain degree like it has been spinning its wheels, so to speak. And and if this is a sign that Somalia needs to rethink its approach, and the outside supporters need to rethink their approach that they're currently been on for quite a while.
I think the problem with the Somali state building is that we have too many interests that are not really aligned. We have the local interests and we have the international interest, and which is solely, to be honest, it's focused on one critical issue for them, which is anti-piracy and counterterrorism. That's all they care about. So when they were supporting state building, that's where they put a lot of their energy on. And they did not care about governance. There's no constraints on executive power. We don't have a constitutional court. We don't have an ombudsman. We don't have accountability institutions. And there's massive corruption. There's not a lot of money given to anti-corruption and efforts, and let alone outside government. Even within government, nobody really cares about that. It's one issue: counterterrorism and counter-piracy. That's their lens. Because the government is created for and by international interests, it gets its legitimacy from international recognition. Back in the day, we used to have this balance whereby if the government really misbehaves, people can complain to the quote-unquote international community, and because of the leverage of legitimacy, and because they are the ones who are funding it and protecting it, they had that legitimacy, that influence, that leverage. now we have Farmajo, who, and probably people like him who will come later on, who think that we are beyond that. We don't really need them. This is really and that they have local grassroots support, which they don't, by the way. And they delude themselves into thinking that they won't listen to the international backers. And what you have is the local interests that are not happy, and because of the lack of representation, we cannot vote, we cannot elect our leaders, and yet they overstay their welcome.
Yeah, this whole episode has a bit of a flavor of the fable of the emperor with no clothes on. So I know you've done a lot of research on Al-Shabaab, and I wanted to save some time to talk with you about this as well. I mean, one often hears that this political crisis, as it deepens, that Al-Shabaab is the winner. That's true, of course, probably, but also I think is becoming a bit of a cliche as well. More generally, taking a step back, what's the state of Al-Shabaab at the moment? How much of Somalia does it control? But also, is it weakening or strengthening?
In terms of weakening or strengthening, Al-Shabaab, its strength varies with time. But at this very moment, it's strengthening. It's conquering new areas. Actually, it was on the way on the upswing when Farmajo came to power, but thanks to Trump's bomb it all, they went downwards. And then now, and because of the reduction in air attacks, they are again back up, and that's the Al-Shabaab territorial control. But don't look at that. Think about Al-Shabaab's control of government areas and how they can tax them, how they can adjudicate matters within government areas. And that's more dangerous than Al-Shabaab's physical control of territories on the map, which is significant areas. They control all the countryside in south and central Somalia, all of it, except areas bordering Ethiopia.
I mean, what you seem to be describing is Al-Shabaab playing very much a long game, establishing in some ways a shadow state, even in government areas, let alone in the areas it controls security-wise. And meanwhile, the actual political actors and political focus is very much on these sort of short-term election crises, et cetera. Is that sort of how you see it?
The problem we're talking about, the Somali state building, Al-Shabaab has, to be honest, it has addressed its issue in its areas and areas the government controls, because Al-Shabaab has local representation. For example, the district commissioner of a district in Mogadishu is protected by two technicals, two battle wagons, probably 20-30 men, is not accessible. But the Al-Shabaab district commissioner in Al-Shabaab areas will probably be driving a donkey. He's approachable. You can go to him and talk to him about your issues, and he will fix it. They have that. And in Al-Shabaab areas, there is no clan infighting. It's very peaceful. So in the competition to show who is a better government, Al-Shabaab is winning.
I think for many outsiders, it's difficult to see how that might be possible given, the level of violence that Al-Shabaab has shown against civilians as well. So where do they derive their legitimacy from, and why haven't they suffered more in the eyes of civilians from some of their tactics?
Al-Shabaab's attacks and the insecurity it causes are not in Al-Shabaab areas. So what you get is that if you are under Al-Shabaab control, if they control where you live in peace. So that's what they give you. But if you control where the government is, you don't live in peace. And you cannot drive around freely. You are harassed by the security forces, at least, and if not killed by Al-Shabaab. But if you're in Al-Shabaab areas, the government cannot kill you, Al-Shabaab will not harass you.
So a lot of this sort of obviously begs a big question, which is, we talk about a federal project, a state-building project, that's troubled in many ways, and a lot of those troubles have sort of come out in the current political crisis, but we're obviously there before. And meanwhile, you have an Al-Shabaab playing a sort of long game with local legitimacy. So I'm wondering what you see as the end game out of all this, and also, what do you think of the notion that, at the end of the day, there will have to be a political settlement or political talks with Al-Shabaab?
I think that end game is, it's a way down the line. It's not going to happen now. And you normally hear, we're not going to talk with the terrorists, but now Al-Shabaab is saying we're not going to talk with these weak people. So the government is too weak, it's too disorganized, it's too unreliable. They are not in a position to keep their word. They are not in a position to really threaten Al-Shabaab. Why would Al-Shabaab talk to them? We need, first of all, to have a capability to harm Al-Shabaab and the capability to govern government areas. And at the very least, make it hard for Al-Shabaab not to operate in Mogadishu or government-controlled areas, and make it hard for Al-Shabaab to control the areas it controls. Then you can reach a stalemate point where Al-Shabaab may be happy to talk, but now we are not there. I think we are closer to Al-Shabaab winning than to the government winning. So Al-Shabaab is not interested.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting in some ways because, of course, we've also seen in the Afghanistan example, for instance, that the talks do accelerate actually when the jihadi group, basically, the momentum is on their side. It's just obviously more difficult to strike a deal in that case because then they have less interest in negotiating.
And I think because Al-Shabaab knows that, and it hears in the news that AMISOM is going to leave, I think that's one of its main demands, that AMISOM leave Somalia before talking to the government. The reason they want AMISOM to leave is because they want to conquer areas. I think it's AMISOM that's stopping AS from taking over Mogadishu today. AMISOM has heavy weaponry, it has armor, which AS does not have, but the government doesn't have that. So I think Al-Shabaab currently, not going to talk with anybody.
So to just sort of close this out, I want to get your thoughts on sort of steps forward, both immediately, but then over, more of a longer time scale like we've been talking. So in the sort of now sense, we talked about this back and forth we've had over this very extended election crisis. I wonder how you see this playing out and what you think could be done to resolve this. There's, of course, talks of an African Union envoy. There's also this awkward situation, or at least can seem somewhat awkward, that the political opposition, which is often the one sort of flexing its muscles in Mogadishu, isn't actually part of these talks directly over the elections. So I'm just wondering how you see this playing out, how you think this could be resolved so that at least possibly you get through this immediate crisis that Somalia has found itself in.
I think getting out of the immediate crisis is going to take a lot of effort, and there has to be a lot of goodwill between the actors. There has to be a lot of confidence building measures has to be taken. Then the federal member states of Puntland and Jubaland have already signaled that they're not happy with the current situation where Roble is in charge of security. They don't believe that he's really in charge of anything. And also the local Mogadishu and politicians have said that they see Roble as a puppet, and they don't see him really in power, and they still see Farmajo through him. Farmajo has done all he can do, to be honest, and short of resigning. So the opposition have started giving in and a little bit. More effort has to be put on them coming on board to this. And in the long term, we need to think about really having a genuine Somali government, because we don't really have one now. There has to be a roadmap towards elections and local representation. And there has to be genuine reconciliation of the clans. There has to be genuine disarmament of clan militias. We need to professionalize the security forces so that they're not used for political reasons in the future. And in the same way that Farmajo has done now, we don't want to have no clan militias and then end up with a dictatorship. And that's actually the argument of some clan elders and some clan leaders, that it was right for them to maintain their clan and militias, because look at what Farmajo did. If they didn't have their forces now, they would be in big trouble. I think we need to professionalize the security forces. After that, we need to deal with the clan militias.
And does that approach that you're describing include sort of rethinking the current system, the federal system, and with all these member states, and then the federal government? Or do you think you can build off of what's there now currently?
I think there's no political will at all to change the current system, and everybody's happy with the current system. It's just a matter of spelling out and defining powers and which powers and which groups have. But everybody's happy with this, and don't break something that everybody's happy with, because when we talk about federal member states, we're talking about clans here. You cannot erase clan from Somali politics, and the whole civil war was because of clans and lack of representation and resources being spent in the capital. And I think the past couple of years, some of that has been happening. We've resorted to all the money being taken to Mogadishu, all aid money taken to Mogadishu, and then from there given to the regions, and the government using that as a leverage with the regions, which is dangerous. That's the whole reason we had the Somali civil war start, and we don't want it starting again. As we've seen now, we need to go back to the basics. When I say basics, I'm talking about the federal system that was agreed upon, and build from it.
If you were to put on the sort of optimist cap, I'm wondering if you saw, sort of this crisis that we're in now, sort of also creating an opportunity perhaps to revisit some of these more fundamental issues in Somalia. If there was a process that sort of played out towards addressing, a very ambitious agenda that you describe, what would that look like to you?
I think the current crisis is really a very good opportunity. It's a great learning. We saw that the president can just overstay the end of his term. We saw that the security forces will just take his orders. We saw that some of them will just not take his orders. So I think this is an opportunity to draw up a system where the president, when his term ends, he's inclined to hold elections because he loses power. So we need to add that clause to. I think that will be something that would happen. I believe that's going to happen, to be honest, so that next time we have somebody who doesn't hold elections on time, and time ends and power flows to the Speaker of Parliament, and as the opposition wanted last time, something like that. So the president will be inclined to make sure elections happen on time. I also see more accountability of the security forces commanders, because they now what they're saying is, I was given an order. I think that should not be enough. And taking illegal orders should be made explicitly illegal, and they should be accountable for that. So I think, and I would want to see some accountability on the destruction and the lives lost during this crisis in the past week. I think that would be a start.
It's a start. I'm wondering what a sort of political process that looks like. In other contexts, it's often a sort of national dialogue sort of situation, or a constitutional process or constitutional review, but that really starts to revisit this fundamental structures and sort of political settlement of the states. Could you see any scenario where a political process arises that addresses beyond these starting points, but the more fundamental issues you're raising?
When Farmajo came to power, and actually before Farmajo, there was discussions going on with the federal member states presidents and Hassan Sheikh, and it continued when Farmajo came to power, which was, how are we going to structure the national security forces, and how are we going to what's going to be the chain of command, and who's going to be responsible for where. And they had a good document. The document was enshrined in the May London conference in 2017, and that was the end of it. So when we talk about Somalia you have to be realistic, and you cannot be very optimistic, because things have been said and done, beautiful documents have been signed. So, and if 2 steps are taken just to fix small issues, I'm happy.
Thank you, Mohammed, very much for coming on.
My pleasure.
Thanks as always for listening. Just a note, we have done a few episodes recently about Somalia, so go back and listen if you want to know more about the current situation and its context. You can find more from Crisis Group at crisisgroup.org. I'm on Twitter at Alan Boswell. The Horn is produced by Mae Francis.